Today's episode is sponsored by the free-to-play game War Thunder, which I will use to give you visual examples of how Japanese fighter pilots attacked Allied bombers during World War II based on the original sources. If you enjoy aircraft just as much as I do, or perhaps you prefer targets like tanks or ships, War Thunder's wide selection of vehicles will have everything you need. More information on War Thunder and your bonus later on in the video. Hello and welcome back, it's Chris from Military Aviation History, and you know what time it is? Yes, it is once again glorious archive time because I found some really fascinating primary documents from the World War II era that describe the tactics used by Japanese pilots to attack bomber formations of B-25s, B-17s, B-24s, even B-29s. So for all of those of you who have already seen these sort of primary document videos, you know what's coming up. And for those of you who are new to this, well, I can only say one thing: strap in, because it's about to get really, really cool. First, let me point out something very important. Do not skip this part, please. While these are primary sources, and while they speak of the experience of certain units, they are just that. You might remember the video that I made about German fighter pilot tactics against American B-17s and heavy bombers. Yes, though, well, if you're interested, it's right here. And you will remember from that video that depending on the German Geschwader, or even depending on the German Gruppe of a Geschwader, or even a Staffel, the tactics and the experiences against American heavy bomber formations changed and varied somewhat. And it's the same thing here. Even though nowadays we tend to sort of think that tactics are very much standardized across forces and that pilots and units would always operate in a certain given manner and that they would always attack bombers in one specific way or the other. In actual reality, looking at these sort of documents, you'll often see that there's a lot of variance between different units, areas, and of course, theaters. Japanese fighter tactics change constantly. Hence, it is improbable that the attacks to be encountered by any one mission can be forecast exactly, and crews must be prepared to meet any and all sorts of fighter tactics. If you've ever looked at a map, and chances are you have, you will have noticed that the Pacific and the South Pacific are vast. They are vast theaters of operations, just truly humongous. And within that area of operation, or within these two areas of operations, you might say, you have actually not just one Japanese air service that the Allies are contending with, but two. You have the Japanese Army's air service and you have the Japanese Navy's air service. And these are two very distinct branches. Remember the most important maxim when we talk about Japanese air power during the Second World War. That is NAFATS. Not all fighters are zeros. Trademark is still pending. Then as a final disclaimer, remember that in the heat of combat, people get stuff wrong. We are all humans, yo, so yeah, just remember that part. So the first file we're going to look at is at the United States Army's Air Force. I'm just going to call them USAF from now on, all right? And this comes from the India-Burma sector of the China-Burma-India theater. And it is titled, what do you think? Japanese Fighter Tactics? Yeah, that's exactly the title it is. And it is Japanese Fighter Tactics against B-25s, which already tells you everything you need to know from the get-go. And it examines a pool of 512 missions that started in December 1942 and ended roughly in December 1943 as well. So generally a period of 1 year. And during this time, out of those 512 missions, you have 18 that resulted in a contact with Japanese fighters. So that's actually a very small percentage. And then the report, as we go through it, I'm going to essentially divide it into 4 chapters. Well, 3 chapters, really. So out of these 4 chapters, we are starting with a short introduction of the Ki-24 and the Ki-45, which gives us some indication of the planes that the B-25s were facing throughout this time in the specific theater, which are of course Japanese Army Air Service planes, not naval planes. I won't go over this chapter because it's really just basic recognition stuff. Second chapter, we will go over this. It provides an analysis of all the directions of attack. Then also it provides some conclusions based on that. And finally, it also gives specific examples, so tactical examples with nice little diagrams of how Japanese pilots attacked the formations on very specific days. So, having said all that, let's start. And we're going to start with the attack directions. The overall concentration of attacks based on percentages looks like so. You can see that the Japanese are concentrating heavily on the sides of the B-25, then the front, and only in rare cases the rear. This already gives us a good idea, but let's break that down into COALT and high and low approaches. At COALT, the breakdown looks like this, showing that when you come in from the same altitude, the Japanese pilots nearly always focus on a side approach. For high and low approaches, I will add that the attacks are from both starboard and the port side. The values here once again show a clear preference for attacks. Looking at both graphs to appreciate this in somewhat close to a 3D condition, it shows that side or close to side approaches are clearly dominating. Front attacks are sometimes executed and rear attacks are very rare. The reason for this has most likely to do with the B-25 itself, as the file's conclusion points out. Initial attacks will take advantage of surprise, dive, and the sun. Enemy fighters most often attack B-25s from below at 10 and 2 o'clock, which enables them to take advantage of wing blind spots. Diving attacks being predominant at 4 and 8 o'clock indicate a Japanese preference to take advantage of the empennage blind spot in the breakaway rather than in the attack. Generally, Japanese will use larger wing blind spots rather than the tail. Japanese will attack from dive and sacrifice a blind spot attack when they can make a pass from the sun. The file actually includes a guide here on how these attacks look like, so I will be using War Thunder here to demonstrate this in a nicely useful visual approximation. First, the Oscar goes on a parallel course, slightly higher and out of range of the B-25. It gathers speed and rolls into the attack once it has overtaken the bomber. It closes in and opens fire before breaking off in an incompleted split S, underflying the B-25 and formation before attacking again from the other side. This attack seems to have been effective against older B-25 models, who had the upper turret positioned more to the rear, giving the gunner an awkward angle to fire, or if the plane comes in at the same altitude or lower, the bomber's wings will protect the fighter from the very bullets that it meant to the turret. A very similar approach can be done from below. While more difficult, this allows the fighter to sneakily approach from an angle that the upper turret can't cover because of the blind spot, even after the B-25 moved the turret from the rear to a frontal position. At this point, all the crew can do is shake an angry fist at the enemy pilot, hope someone in the formation hits him, or that he misses the aircraft completely. Preferably, it would be all three. Interestingly, the file actually already states that it is likely that low beam passes will be more common in the future than high passes because of exactly this turret change. The following are a few original drawings from the attacks that the units experienced. These can be rather simple, like a weaving attack flown on the 3rd of December 1942, or a combination of attacks seen in early May 1943. More complex attacks are rare, but they do happen, like on the 21st of May 1943. Have a look here at the picture while I quote from the file, and big thank you here to my patrons and channel members whose support actually allows me to pay for the publishing fees that these pictures have from the archives. These fees vary from archive to archive, and in this case they were reasonable, so big thank you to the patrons and channel members who made this possible. Enemy aircraft employed coordinated attacks using deception and approaching into attacks from sides and blind spots below and left and right of rudders. Attacks from above in split S also directed attacks from sides of about 15 enemy aircraft, which seemingly on signal from leader turned simultaneously and attacked, raking the entire formation. Number 3 in C flight fell away, apparently badly hit. Enemy aircraft concentrated attacks on this plane. The enemy aircraft flying blind spots left and right of rudder seemed to turn their noses into our formation at intervals and fire their large caliber guns. Our squadron employed tactics of flying into and below clouds and frequently changing direction of flight. By the way, and I have to get closer for this one. My chair doesn't want to come closer. But by the way, did you know that these videos do not just take sweat, tears, time and money to make? Well, 2 out of those 4 are lies, but I will let you figure out which one it is. But no, to make these videos, I have to travel to archives, I have to visit museums, edit the videos, I do all of this myself. I'm sort of a one-boy show, I guess. So you know what comes next, right? Yeah, I feel ya. If you enjoy this content, consider supporting via Patreon and channel memberships. You will also be receiving some unique perks there, from aircraft manuals that I share regularly on site, as well as production updates, Q&A question priorities, as well as a Discord server that we have. There is a nice little community forming there that is specifically just talking about aviation, and they're just fantastic folks. And on that Discord server, we also have bi-monthly meetings where we just chat about, well, anything that has to do with aviation, past, present, future. And if we don't have any topic on that, which is relatively rare, but sometimes we talk about good old life as well, which is really fun. So if you enjoy this content, if you want to support the channel, and if you want to join the community, then, well, check out Patreon and channel memberships. Okay, so having done the medium bombers, let's move on to the heavy hitters, shall we? So this report here, actually I have a good selection of files on Japanese tactics against heavy bombers. So I think we're going to have a couple of more videos coming up relatively soon. Well, soon, you know, my kind of soon. But this document that I want to share to you today is called Japanese Fighter Tactics Against Heavy Bombers. Yeah, once again, very straightforward, and it's from May 1944. In this file, it includes reference to attacks that were primarily flown against B-17s and B-24s, but it looks like it was partially written in order to collect information to see what B-29s would have to contend with. It is likely that the Japanese will devise new fighter tactics to be used specifically against the B-29 aircraft after they have become familiar with its performance and defensive characteristics. In the case of early B-29 missions, however, Japanese attacks would probably follow the pattern of those used against the B-24 and B-17. This is born out of a few sporadic attacks that have already been made against B-29 cargo missions. Now let's have a closer look. Within the chapter Favorite Japanese Fighter Attacks, the report has a collection of 7 patterns. Yes, 7 patterns, which the USAF even gave individual names to. Now, I don't know if the bomber units gave those names or if somebody who summarized the report felt that he was being, I don't know, especially creative in giving these names, but you know, these are the names I have to work with, so don't assume that they are standardized, but we are going to go with it now because that's what comes from the file. Now, let's have a look at some of these patterns, but before we do that, there's an important notice here that tells us what all these attack patterns actually meant to do. The purpose of many Japanese attacks is to produce stragglers and cripples. If it is humanly possible to avoid it, don't straggle. Little damage has been experienced by the ships which stay in formation and search constantly for impeding attacks. A sure ticket for trouble is straggling. The Japanese is also quick to spot a weakness or vulnerability, such as a feathered engine or inoperative turret. Attacks are concentrated against a vulnerable spot and now pressed home more closely and with more vigor than normal attacks, regardless of what position the crippled plane is flying in the formation. So out of this collection, let's have a look at some of these attack patterns. The first one is called, or at least the file calls it, the 12 o'clock express. This is the most dangerous of all Japanese attacks and the one that must be most carefully guarded against. It develops from 12 o'clock high, oftentimes as high as 30 degrees to 40 degrees, and will come out of the sun if the course of the bomber formation permits. It is executed at high speed, usually in a power dive, and is aimed to rake the lead ship. Usually the planes attacks singly, one after the other. The 12 o'clock express is rarely coordinated. In cases where fighters have inflicted severe damage with the 12 o'clock express, the attacks, because of their lightning speed, are usually completed before the crews knew that they were developing. That was the 12 o'clock express, and now we're going to the next pattern, and this one is called, you're not going to believe this, this one is called the Dr. Pepper. Oh, this is so Yankee, it hurts my sides. Oh. Nobody tell Bowtime Gaming, please. So the Dr. Pepper, it looks like this. Fighters attacking in numbers will also coordinate attacks between 4 planes, 2 each coming in at 10 and 2 o'clock from level or below against our leadership. Fire is usually aimed to rake the entire ship. After closing the attack, fighters do a fast wing over and go into a steep dive. Other planes sit on the beams out of range, waiting for cripples to appear as a result of the frontal attacks, or make passes from 3 and 9 o'clock high. The beam attacks are seldom pressed closely. The fighters on the line astern are like vultures if a bomber straggles. The next pattern, and truly, whoever wrote these, he must have been joking. I mean, whoever wrote this, the next pattern, it is called the belly button. The belly button. The belly button. Employed by the Japanese when intercepting in smaller numbers, is a belly attack approaching from the stern low. The fighter goes into a dive from 500 yards astern and then begins a steep climb to the belly of the bomber. This attack depends for its execution on the unusual climbing ability of the fighter and may be carried through to a stall. This attack may be attempted against the B-29 as there is some evidence that the Japanese believe it to be blind from below. However, the timing would be difficult because of the speed advantage of the B-29 over the B-24, against which the attack has been used most. Okay, so beyond these sort of attack patterns, we had 3 out of 7 right now. The file goes also on to have some general observation about Japanese fighter pilots. And I think actually this is of particular interest because generally speaking, this sort of late war period where the file originates from, May 1944, we already have this sort of assumption that the Japanese fighter pilots' quality and skill set is decreasing a lot. But the file actually makes it out to be that at this point in time, remember that the information that's being summarized here is probably collected from a period of couple of months before this, that actually the general collapse in sort of the fighter pilot skill on the Japanese side that we popularly attribute to this sort of late war period does not seem to have happened just yet. Japanese pilots generally are good flyers, some of them unusually good. Navy ship-based pilots are the cream of the lot, Navy land-based next, with the Army Air Force pilots definitely in third place. Some of the latter are good, some are green and inexperienced. The important factor to be borne in mind is that a crew won't know until combat is actually closed whether the enemy is capable and highly proficient or green and raw. Chances are in favor of his being experienced. Japanese flight discipline is excellent. Formations are maintained while awaiting the best opportunity to press the initial attack. When delivered in strength, attacks are sometimes coordinated, and in some instances a fine degree of teamwork has been exhibited. This is particularly true of Naval Air Force pilots. Gunnery, while not outstanding, is constantly improving and today is much more accurate than it was 8 or 10 months ago. The probable reason is that they recently had more targets and more practice. It must be borne in mind that even mediocre gunners sometimes hit their targets, and much of the gunnery is a lot better than mediocre. Japanese fighter pilots in the early stages of the war had a healthy respect for the US Cal 50 machine gun, and this is still true in some cases, particularly when large, well-flown formations of bombers are being attacked. However, combat reports show that the Japanese are holding their courses and maintaining their fire against our bombers at closer ranges. Like the German, the Japanese is a master of taking advantage of sun and clouds. These two sources of attack must be searched constantly. And then finally, we have an interesting point here in that suicide attacks have been pretty generally exploded as a myth. There are several cases on record where fighters have crashed into our bombers, but it is believed that the crashes were unintentional and beyond the control of the pilot. What their tactics will be in this regard when missions are run close to or over Japan remains to be seen. And yes, it does say exploded, maybe they meant exposed, I just don't know. What I do know is that today's sponsor has plenty of explosions. Virtual of course, but War Thunder features more than 1,700 aircraft, helicopters, as well as targets like, well, tanks and ships. And you can blow all of them up in bombastic virtual battles full of detonations, eruptions, blasts, and well, I'm starting to run out of explosion synonyms here, but hey, try out some of those tactics I showed to you today. Think about your attack approaches next time you see a bomber, try to stay outside his gunner arcs, and if you do shoot him down, let him know that I sent you and I taught you this stuff. War Thunder is constantly evolving, of course, with new tanks, ships, and of course also, most importantly of all, aircraft in continuous updates, and it also features full cross-platform integration between PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. So sign up for free by following the link in the description below and receive your unique sign-up bonus. Alright, so I think that gives us a really nice introduction into the Japanese fighter pilot tactics against bomber formations during World War II in the Pacific area. And if you are interested in this, do let me know. I have a lot of more files on this specific issue, also looking specifically at B-17s, B-24s and the B-29. So if that's your jam, getting these sort of videos straight out of the archive via primary documents into your living room or wherever you might be watching it now, do let me know. And yeah, as always, you can support the channel if you want in this sort of video and this sort of content via Patreon and channel memberships. That is very, very appreciated. Hope to see you there. And if you're interested in Japanese tactics, check out Military History Visualized video on Japanese bomber tactics, as well as my video on the fascinating tale of the Japanese bomber attack against USS Lexington in 1942. And as always, I wish all of you a great day and see you in the sky.